Welcome to Shut Up and Say Something. I am your host and creator of the show, Deedre Daniel. This podcast is all about how to live a fascinating life, and we're learning how to do that one interesting conversation at a time. We try to stay away from discussing politics, religion, and the ad nauseum topic du jour, but anything else is fair game. And today we're talking about ghosts. This is a topic that holds the attention of many people. And if you want to be more interesting, you need some good stories to share, especially with Halloween quickly approaching. My ghost story takes place exactly 10 years ago. It was August 2012, and I managed a corporate partnership with the National Geographic Society. They were hosting an event called BioBlitz in the Rocky Mountain National Park in Estes Park, which is a town in Colorado. Estes Park is also home to the Stanley Hotel, which was the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. Mr. King had stayed at that hotel one night with his wife, and they were the only guests in this huge hotel, which weirded him out. They ate dinner alone in a dark dining room, walked down those long, famous hallways all alone, very creepy stuff. And that night, he had a nightmare that was so terrible, he woke up drenched in sweat. And as the story goes, he lit a cigarette to calm down. And by the time he finished the cigarette, for those of you non-smokers, that is roughly, I would say, about 7 minutes if you pace yourself with your puffing. But if you're sucking it down, it's probably half of that time. So by the time he had finished his cigarette, the story of The Shining was like outlined in his head. And at that moment, that's what led to the creation of the best-selling book and famous film. So it only made sense that we would stay at the Stanley while we were on this work trip. But the only problem was it was more expensive than the event lodging that we were supposed to stay at. Since flight options were limited and we had plenty of comp time from all the other traveling that we had done for work, another lady and I decided to fly out a day early and stay in 2 separate rooms of that hotel and just pay for it out of pocket. When we checked in, the other woman asked if the presidential suite was available, and it was. And apparently, they had this policy at the time. If the suite was available the day you check in, you can be upgraded to it for a nominal fee. And she immediately pounced on it. And then she invited me to stay with her, which I didn't want to do. See, I don't like sharing hotel rooms with people. I want my own space. And I have 3 main reasons for this. One, as soon as I walk into a hotel room, I have to poop. I could have gone maybe 20 minutes ago, but something about walking in that new room makes me need to go again. It's very primal. I don't know. Maybe I just need to make that room mine or something. And instant pooping is awkward when sharing a room with someone that you want to maintain a professional relationship with. And the second reason, I like to be able to walk around naked or in my underwear without someone judging me, which is also awkward when you see someone at the office on the regular. And the third, although I talk a lot when I'm around a lot of people, I also love my quiet time and I can daydream for hours. And if I haven't had a break from nonstop interactions with other people, I will retreat into my mind right in front of them. Some people call it spacing out. My husband refers to it as ignoring him. So I just prefer to unwind alone without an audience. And I wasn't going to say any of this to her directly because, it's private information. But as I stood there trying to come up with a believable reason as to why I wanted my own room, the oh so helpful front desk receptionist butted into our conversation and said, "Oh, the suite is actually a cottage with several bedrooms and bathrooms." It's like she could read my mind or something. And she was more than happy to cancel my reservation at no charge. So I had no way out. So now we're staying in a separate little building nestled away from the famous hotel with multiple bedrooms in it. This annoyed me because I wanted to stay in the main building where apparently all the hauntings took place. I wanted the real Stanley experience. So off we go to the presidential cottage. We dropped off our bags and headed over to the grocery store to pick up some snacks and wine. The presidential cottage had this big back deck that looked out over the mountains, and the oh so helpful receptionist told us that we needed to catch the sunset. And as we headed back to the car, I noticed a store was selling red rum, and I couldn't pass that up. So we added a little bit of that to our sunset happy hour assortment. And so back at the cottage, the woman I was traveling with claimed the largest bedroom on the main floor. And I opted for the upstairs room, which wasn't as creepy as the other ones on the basement level. I know I just said I wanted to stay in the main building where the hauntings took place, but the whole point of staying in the hotel, staying at that Stanley, was to get the Stephen King experience. And staying in this opulent hotel was what I had in mind, not staying in a tiny building close to it in the basement. So, anyway, I have a few safety routines which were drilled into my head by my dad, who is a US Navy officer. And one is always check the windows and entrances of any building I'm staying at. And anytime we went on vacation, my dad would check all the points of entry. Before we could do anything fun, he would make us study the emergency exit map on the hotel room door and practice walking to the emergency exits on our hotel floor. That used to annoy me, but now I compulsively do those things because, we turn into our parents. So before we settled on the back deck, I noticed all of the windows in this cottage were open. And so I went around closing all of the windows and locking them. Some of them were actually hard to pull down. And so my colleague had to help me with some of them. And there was one window in particular we both had to pull on. And then I locked the front door. We made our drinks and we walked out to the deck to watch the sunset. When it was time to make our second drinks, probably 20 minutes later, well, it was probably more like maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, don't judge. I walked into the cottage to get some ice and all the windows were wide open. I'm talking like a big old breeze billowing through the living room. And my colleague, who was standing right behind me, said, "Oh my God, now there's got to be an explanation." So she goes around, she checks the front door, it's locked. She goes down to the basement, everything's locked down there. And all I could think of was, I didn't want to share a room. I did not want to share a room. So I wanted to move back into the main building, but that seemed like an unnecessary expense and hassle. So I stayed put. But now I was a little freaked out and I realized we were getting exactly what we paid for. And I had buyer's remorse. And I also didn't care about that sunset anymore. I had the worst night's sleep. We're talking the entire time. I felt like someone was standing next to my bed looking over at me. I pretty much slept all night long with like one eye open. And the next day we transferred to the cheap lodge. And although the bed was lumpy and the linens were thin and scratchy, I slept better. And we found out later that cottage is haunted. So get this. Apparently, guests complain about their windows being opened, and there is a sighting of a ghost that has been seen in the upstairs bedroom hanging around that bed. Yeah. I have many more stories than that, but today we're going to focus on the stories from my guest, Mark Muncy. He is a curator of many scary and eerie stories. He has written several books about ghosts, hauntings, and all things creepy. Check out Eerie, Florida, Freaky, Florida, Creepy, Florida, and Tales of Terror from Tampa Bay, and more. Plus, he has this newest book coming out, Eerie Appalachia. And you can find these books at Walmart, Cracker Barrel, and of course, Amazon. But if you order from him directly on his website, his wife, who's the illustrator of his books, will draw a special monster just for you. In the next hour, he tells many interesting and scary stories from a giant turtle, ghosts, aliens, and UFOs. And he gives us a newly released story from Appalachia that no one has heard before. He also enjoys researching the deep history behind these folk tales, which are often gruesome and can be very upsetting. So if you don't want to hear about evil spirits, human atrocities, murders, and torture from the past, I suggest you sit this one out. You have been warned.
Yeah, all things spooky.
All things spooky. And I don't know Mark at all. He was recommended to me by David Sidoti, whom I interviewed in the very first episode of the podcast, all about tracking Bigfoot. And he said, "Hey, you got to meet my friend Mark." And that's how this connection happened. So I'm pretty excited about this. And we're going to talk about all kinds of ghost stories. But before we get into those, I read your bio and I have a lot of questions just off of what you sent me. So the first one is, it said you're the creator of Hellview Cemetery, a charity haunted house in Central Florida, which was banned by the city of St. Petersburg. So let's start there. What is this house and why did it get banned?
I was a single dad and I couldn't afford to take my kids to Halloween Horror Nights anymore. We decided to build one and we wanted to build our own haunted attraction.
That's a good idea. And haunted, and those tickets are expensive.
Oh yeah, if you imagine, a family of three. I had two daughters, and trying to get out there was a nightmare.
Yeah.
literally. So,
Yeah.
so I decided, hey, we'll build our own. And I know how to. I had some experience working in haunted attractions and all that, so I was like, all right, I'll. It's not, it's a little step. But first, we started as a display, just a front display, and as these things do, they get bigger and bigger and bigger,
Uh-huh.
and people expect more of you. And then it became, well, we could build a we could build a haunted house, and so we did. But the twists on our haunted house and our displays were, we did it all based on local lore and legends,
Hmm.
from the Tampa Bay area mostly. And that was because I thought it'd be cooler than instead of having a werewolf jump out at you, we had the skunk ape jump out at you.
Yeah.
Instead of having a vampire jump out at you, there was this infamous bordello owner in Tampa history named Madame Orr, and she ran the Orr House, which is great name for a bordello, right?
Yeah. You sure it wasn't the O house?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was the
the
Or
the
house.
Orr House, and but Madame Orr, which I assume is a pseudonym. We did. There was not much history on her except for the fact that Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders went and visited. Well, not
Uh-huh.
Teddy himself, but the Rough Riders did, and some of them didn't come back. So he demanded that it be burned to the ground by the city of Tampa.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah. So I'm like, so how infamous is this lady? So of course, for our haunted house, we made it from dusk till dawn, and we made her a vampire. And so that's what we would do. We would, what we called hell view up the legends. We'd spookify them,
I
and
love that.
and
But
we'd post.
why were you condemned or banned?
So what happened is we kept growing. We kept growing, and eventually, we did it all for charity. But eventually, we had 10,000 people a weekend coming through my backyard.
Oh my God.
So yeah,
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 there's some
it's
zoning issues or
that's
something, I'm
exact. Well,
sure.
and that was it. We always applied for an event permit and all that, and the mayor always granted it. But then we got a new mayor,
Oh,
and
who didn't
and
like
he
Halloween?
suddenly didn't like the haunted house. He closed the 3 haunted houses that were in town, and they changed the zoning law, so we couldn't find a place that actually would let us. So the only thing they would say we
So
could
it's
use
an
is,
actual witch hunt. That's
it
crazy.
really was. It was insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they still had all the Christmas light displays that have 10,000 people drive through and and block up traffic for miles. Those are fine, but
Were you slaughtering goats? I don't understand.
no, and like I said, it was all for lore and all for charity. We didn't charge admission.
And
Um,
you're doing Florida history.
yeah, and again, it was we had off duty policemen, we had off duty firefighters, we had
Uh-huh.
hundreds of volunteers. So we were always in code. We even were the only ADA compliant attraction, in Central Florida at the time, because even Horror Nights wasn't at that point.
It sounds
Uh,
like a scene from Footloose, and you had to get, the city
yeah,
council involved so you could dance.
that was
It's
basically so we could spooky
ridiculous.
things. So then in 2015, the new mayor came in and he denied, or it was 2014, came in and denied our permit.
And you never
So
got it back.
and we tried. I kept paying the $80 fee to apply for an event permit every year, and
Uh-huh.
I knew it was pointless, but I try every year just out of luck. And I finally stopped after his 8th year as mayor, last year, and I was like, nope, yeah, we're done.
It's a shame. Well, it sounds like it was good while it lasted. I mean, 10,000 people, that's
Oh yeah, and our
impressive.
website was
And that
viral
was per
before we.
weekend. You said like
Yeah.
10,000 per weekend.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a
easy,
lot.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many weekends did you run that for?
We did 2 weekends a month in October, so we would do the
Wow.
last 2
Yeah.
weekends in October.
Wow, that's
And then we would
impressive.
do the Saturday after Halloween, just for the people who worked all the theme parks and worked all the Halloween events, and they still wanted to
Aw,
come see one. We'd let them come see ours.
you see,
So
you were doing a public service there.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like that. So I read something else in your bio I have questions about.
Okay,
It says that you presently live on the remains of an ancient midden.
yeah, Shell Midden.
So, but like I looked up midden and it said it's a dung heap. Is that
Yep,
true or is that?
yeah, it's so Florida. You got to remember, the natives came here. They loved the beaches. It was beautiful. It's nice weather. Let's do this.
Uh-huh.
And they would build their settlements, and then they would just make piles of garbage. And it was
Uh-huh.
just, shells, and, because they were eating oysters and fish and bones, and they would just throw it up, and then they'd cover it with mud, and they'd put another layer. They're basically making landfills,
Oh.
and they would just rise up, and some of them would be huge. Some of them, like Crystal River mounds, are still there, and they're,
Uh-huh.
ginormous. But what happened was we were building Hellview one of the first years, and we dug a grave in the front yard, because, hey, I didn't care about my yard. I'm not a gardener or anything. So we dug a hole, and we started coming up with bones. And I'm like,
Ooh.
oh no, we've discovered a crime scene, because I
Oh,
couldn't
no.
identify the bones. And so we called the police. The police came out. They said, oh no, this is an ancient site. Let's get an archaeologist. So I called the local university, and they sent an archaeologist over, USF, over from Tampa. And we became quick friends with Professor Kimberly, the archaeologist over there. And she gets in there and she's like, oh no, this isn't, this isn't a burial ground. It is a shell midden. And she's just like, I'm just happy it wasn't one of the lost cemeteries at Tampa Bay. And I'm like, lost cemeteries at Tampa Bay? How do I not know this? And so she explains to me that, the settlers would come in, they'd find the flat land, they'd chase the natives away, and they'd build their settlement. And they'd, have a graveyard, and they'd have a church, and they'd have a little shop. And then, a hurricane would come through, a tropical storm would come through, tornadoes, or the natives would come back and shoot arrows at them, and they'd all flee, and the buildings would go away. And then another group would come down a couple years later and go, oh, wow, look at all this flat land. Let's build a town. Let's build this. And they do the same thing over and over and over again. And so eventually, when the city finally got officially platted, they bulldozed everything and started building streets. But they didn't move all the bodies. Classic poltergeist here, right? So there are numerous missing cemeteries. And every time we build something new in Tampa Bay, somebody finds one. One of them I researched was called Hillview, and there's not a lot of hills in Florida. So of course my Tales from the Crypt fan in me realized, that meant it was overlooking a shell midden. So we called it Hellview, and that's where the cemetery came from. And we claimed that was ours, the lost cemetery of Hellview. We found it. We actually later think we figured out that was actually down in Sarasota. That's under a housing development in Sarasota, because there's a Hillview Road and a Shady Road, and it was the Hillview Shady Rest Cemetery. So
all right. Now, and it also says you are married to illustrator Carrie Schultz.
Yes, my lovely and talented wife. She's the real talent. She makes all our monsters and ghosts come to life. I just do the words. She's the real talent.
I looked at some of her drawings. They're great.
Yeah,
they're very special.
Yeah, she knocks them out of the park. She loves drawing monsters, and the more we get, the creepier they get, the better she has fun with them. And
is she related to the famous cartoonist?
No, not at all. Not at all. We looked. We were also worried because I found out her family was from the same area of Kentucky my family was from, and there's not a lot of families there, and we were suddenly worried. Yeah.
I mean, did you have children?
Yeah. No, we haven't, but I had 2 from my previous marriage. But thankfully, we found out we're not really related. So
you're not related. Okay, all right. So
close. Shoo. Dodge that stereotype. So Carrie,
Mark, I want to hear some stories. I want to hear some.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You want some Florida stories?
Why don't you tell me some of the more unique stories in Florida, and then let's hear about your new book. I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of really cool stories there.
Yeah, and like I said, I love these obscure ones, or things that I thought weren't obscure, but suddenly turned out they were. They were things that nobody knew. One of my personal favorites is Punta Gorda, which is just south of where we live in Tampa Bay, about an hour or 2 south, and it's on the Gulf Coast, and it has an area right around there. It's called Port Charlotte Harbor, and in 1937, one of the hurricanes came through, and this is before we named them. So this was called the Florida-Alabama hurricane. And because it came from Florida and went up to Alabama. Anyway, this one flew up right past Punta Gorda as a near miss. And it did what happened when we saw it when Hurricane Irma went through by Tampa Bay. It sucked all the water out of the bay, and you could walk like a half mile out into the bay. And there are all these fish and crabs and stuff just loose. So this is 1937, and it's right after, the Great Depression. Still, families are struggling. Suddenly there's fish and game everywhere. So everybody runs out, starts grabbing stuff. One family looks a little further out, and they see a pirate's chest.
Ooh.
And they're like, ooh, gold, money, who knows what. Let's go get that. So they run out there. They can't open the chest. They're breaking into it, and the water's coming back as it comes back fast.
Right. Yeah.
They smash it in. It's full of cannonballs.
What?
Cool thing, but not useful for a family, right?
No.
But now they're stuck. The water is coming. Then so they run, and they see this like mound with a tree on it. So the water must not get that high. So they rush over to that, and at least it'll be that maybe they can climb the tree and be a little safer and to low tide, and they can get the rest of the way back in. but the water keeps coming, and then it lifts up and starts floating, and they're like, oh no, it's an upside down boat. We're gonna float out to sea. This is terrible. What have we done? But then it changes course and goes against the current. And the daughter looks down and sees a giant head and sees legs. They're on the back of a giant turtle, all four of them, family of four. And it takes them back toward shore.
I'm confused. Where was the tree? Where's the tree in all this?
Growing on the back of the turtle. That's what they were using to hang on to this thing.
Okay. All right.
Crazy, right?
Yes. Okay. All right. Keep going.
So, that becomes folklore. They tell their tale. Nobody believes them. This is stupid. A giant turtle, didn't save your family, and it just kind of disappears for a few years. 1962, just a little while later, the Port Charlotte Harbor is now a naval station because of World War II. And then we're also worried about the Russians and, in Cuba and all this stuff. So they're on high alert, and they're out doing some work on one of the boats out in the harbor. And a diver sees a dark shape, a very large dark shape, and he's convinced it's a sub. They're under attack. So he sounds the alarm. They go full scramble. They all, get out to see what this thing is. And they described a giant turtle, a shellless turtle that was approximately 30 feet in diameter, according to all the descriptions and the sketch artists for the Navy that brought it to life. That would be the largest loggerhead turtle in history, because the largest we've ever caught was 17 feet in diameter. But we have Navy divers and captains and admirals signing off on this report. So in the same harbor, 30 years later, 30-foot turtle wasn't a box turtle like the original legend, but legends get kind of mixed up.
Yeah, right.
And it was shellless, which is interesting, according to all their descriptions. So maybe it lost its shell because the tree got snagged on something. But they it's not exactly how turtles work, but who knows? But anyway, so that story is basically verified. There is a second witness less than 30 years later in the same area where the turtle could have even gotten bigger.
Does that make him a homeless turtle if he doesn't have a shell?
Yeah, shell. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So I like that one.
That's one of my favorites.
What else do you have?
Okay. Well, let's go. That one's kind of cute, right? Family saved, all that. Let's go darker. We got to go darker.
Well, you had to warm everyone up a little bit.
Yeah, everybody needs the spooky. Everybody needs the spooky. This one is down in Port St. Lucie, which is on the other coast, over on the Atlantic coast. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of more mid Florida, a little north of Fort Lauderdale, a little north of Jupiter. And this town has a tree there called the Devil's Tree. Now, Florida has a lot of devils. We got the Devil's Chair. We got Devil's Millhopper. We've got, all these things are named for the devil because it's hot and it's terrible down here. Well, when you research these stories, very quickly, I discovered this one involved a man with three names. And now, if you ever research a story in Florida and the man has three names, he's one of two things. He's either A, a politician, or B, a serial killer. This guy was B. He was a sheriff's deputy in Broward County named Gerard John Schaefer. And he liked to do what he called twofers. He would flash his badge at hitchhikers, get them in pairs, and then take them to this tree near this abandoned house that he knew of, and out in Port St. Lucie. And he would tie them to the tree and do terrible things to them. And then he would make them decide who dies first. And then he would kill one and still do terrible things to their body while the other one watched. And then he would kill the other one and do more terrible things.
Oh, geez.
So he got away with this for some time. We don't know exactly how long, but he eventually lost his job. Imagine that. And he had to move further north. And he got a job with another sheriff's department. And his first week on that job, he tried doing it again, but he didn't have access to the tree in the house. So he tried to find another location he could do it. But he got called away right as he had tied them up and said, I'm going to do terrible things to you. And he got called away for a real case and he had to go. They escaped and went to his sheriff's office, which thankfully he wasn't at. And they explained what happened. When he came back, he saw they'd escaped. So he went to his boss and said, oh, I did a stupid thing. I was just trying to scare these kids. And so but the sheriff didn't buy it, arrested him for false imprisonment and false arrest. But he got out on bail. And while he's out on bail awaiting trial, back at the Devil's Tree, a peddler is out there looking through that old abandoned house. And he goes out to the tree and he finds the body parts.
Oof.
And so he calls the police. The police get down there, they start investigating, and they realize, hey, this is awfully similar to what that guy did just a little north of us. So they get the search warrant, they go search his mother's house, and they find his room, and they find his shoebox with his trophy case,
Oof.
which has personal belongings to some of the victims and teeth that match
Oh.
the body parts to the south.
Ah.
So he goes, and they find tons of writing, all these diary entries, basically confessing to about 80 murders.
Mm.
So they take him in. He goes to jail. He is convicted for the murder of those two ladies that they found the body parts for.
Mm-hmm.
But he still says, I was framed. I'm innocent. I don't know. And they're like, what about all these stories? Oh, I'm a writer.
Mm.
You know, I'm going to write these this is, how I would have done it, So he writes a book called Killer Fiction, written by a killer on death row, and he publishes it in prison. It's crazy read. He becomes pen pals with Ted Bundy, and they are comparing notes. And he likes to say, Ted's like, I killed 27. And he's like, well, I killed a lot more than you. But I'm innocent. I'm innocent to everybody else. I was just messing with Ted. This guy's terrible. So finally, he gets murdered in prison by his roommate.
Hold on. I heard that Ted Bundy worked at a suicide hotline.
Yeah, for a little while.
Yeah, and isn't that weird? It's like
Florida.
you can't kill yourself. I kill you.
Yeah.
I'm going to convince you not to do it.
Yep. It's a weird world. So Schaefer gets murdered by his roommate. Both his eyes are carved out, and he's stabbed 49 times. So couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Wow.
The story goes, that's not the end of the story, because it's all about the tree, right?
Uh-huh.
The tree, some say, is what caused him to do this, that he was just a normal guy, but he hung out at that tree too much. And the tree caused him.
Cursed?
The tree is the devil's tree. It had a hole in the side that drips black sap. And if you collected that sap and used it for your dark rituals, the energy would be tenfold. So people would go there in black cloaks and grab the sap. And the town, was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And now there's a serial killer tied to it. So it's gotten even more infamous.
Yeah.
Like, we got to cut down this tree. So they hired two guys to go kill this old live oak. And they get out there and their chainsaws break like instantly after they try to hurt the tree. So they go get new chainsaws, and they get in a car accident and are both killed immediately in a head-on collision.
What?
Yes.
No.
So the legend of the tree grows, right?
Is the tree still there?
The tree is still there. They tried poisoning it, didn't die. They tried filling in the hole where the sap was dripping with cement, hoping that it would choke it to death. Now it's got an impervious cement trunk because it's grown around it. It's still there. It's still growing. Eventually, they buy the land, bulldoze the house, and call it, they make it into a state park. It's the Okamic State Park, and you can go visit. The path that goes through the park goes nowhere near the devil's tree. But those in the know, or those who read my books, will know, don't take the first entrance, don't take the second entrance. But then there's a third path that goes right to the devil's tree. And you can even still see the foundation of the old house. They're just a few steps away.
Wow.
Crazy story. And it's funny, of all the places we filmed, that was one of the places we had the most issues with electronic equipment and stuff for the TV crew that came with us on that. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me another one. I love it. I want to hear them all. All right, what do you got next?
All right, well, let's see. Let's go aliens.
Ooh,
right?
Okay, yes.
All right, let's go UFOs. So the most famous, of course, was probably the Gulf Breeze UFO sightings in the 1980s. This was at the height of UFO mania. In Search of it ended, and all this. And there was a flap. It was, that's what UFO researchers call, when there's tons and tons of encounters in a short period.
It's called a flap?
Called a UFO flap. Or there's a Bigfoot flap when there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings in areas, stuff like that.
Okay.
So this was a UFO flap, and this one had tons and tons of sightings around the town of Gulf Breeze, Florida, and kind of went over as far as Panama City and all the way over to Pensacola. So now there's a naval base there and an Air Force base there. So it could have been, just experimental aircraft, something unusual was going on. One man comes out, his name's Ed Walters, and he comes out with these amazing photos of UFOs. They're some of the most iconic UFO photos in history. They're clear. They're everything you want in a UFO photo. They look like,
which never happens.
Never happens. And so everybody's like, oh my gosh, this guy, he becomes world famous and is, put on all the talk shows and all the things, to the point where his house is like swarmed by people. So he moves away. He's like, all right, I can't deal with this anymore. I got a little too famous. He puts out a book, with all his photos. And then the people who buy his house get up in his attic because they're redoing the insulation, and buried in the insulation, they find the model that looks exactly like the spaceship he took pictures of.
Oh no.
So he's pretty much debunked. Now he says the government planted it to debunk him and all that. It's pretty obvious. Plus,
no.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious he was doing double negatives and stuff like that with special cameras. So pretty sad, but that doesn't explain the hundreds of other sightings, right? That just debunks. But because of that, that whole area got kind of wiped from the map for UFO, researchers for a little while, because hot potato, it's a hoax area.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go down to the Everglades, right? And this is a number of years earlier, and this would be in the 1960s, and probably one of the first sightings or encounters that is a possible abduction or an attempted abduction. And it's one of those, most people don't talk about it because it didn't fit the descriptions of, like, at the time. It was Project Blue Book investigated it, said it was a hoax. They did that to everything where it involved a thing landing.
Tell everyone what Project Blue Book is.
Project Blue Book was the U.S. Air Force's attempt to study the alien phenomena. Mostly started because that 1952 flap, where UFOs were everywhere. That was where the term flying saucer came from. Mm-hmm. UFOs were sighted over the Capitol building. Everybody's always like, I'll believe UFOs when they were seen over the Capitol. They were 1952, but nobody talks about it. And the Project Blue Book was the Air Force's study. They brought in Dr. Alan Hynek and a couple military advisors, and they would study these things, and they would see if they could logically explain them. And they did for a lot of cases. They were able to debunk a lot, but they also had plenty that were unknown, that they still at the end could not identify. But they said they weren't a threat, because there was never any, anyone harmed. But that's because every time somebody was, quote, abducted or something, where they had an encounter with a being, they immediately just labeled it as a hoax. That was just their general rule of thumb. And every single one was ruled a hoax. And most of them have no records of an investigation. Alan Hynek, the professor, he was one of the ones who was so mad that's how they were labeled, because he hadn't even heard of some of these cases. He's supposed to be involved in every single investigation, and he was not even told about some of these till after they became declassified. Alan Hynek was the specialist, the consultant for Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind later, after he had retired from the Air Force, to try to make them real, and that's why that movie is so iconic. Down in the Everglades, a guy is driving 3 Boy Scouts home from a thing out in the swamp. He's out there and he's driving along the road, and he sees some weird lights off the side of the road. So he pulls over, tells the boys, hang on, I'll be right back. And he even tells them, should, I trip or fall or something, there's a farmhouse just a few blocks back. Just head back that way. He walks around, looking around, and apparently he comes around a bunch of trees, and there is a craft hovering at head height above him, metal. And he hits his head on it. It's like bonk, and he's like, what? Because he can't see well with his little flashlight. It shines up, and it's metallic and it's reflective. And the door opens and a light comes out and smoke comes out. And that's the last thing he remembers. And he is woken up about an hour later by the boys with the farmer from down the road. And he's covered in burn. And the area around him is like scorched. And no one says anything about this for a while, because when the Blue Book comes in, he has a bad reputation as a drinker in town. So it's obviously a hoax. What he had done.
Did the rest of his body feel okay?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they studied it. Radiation burns, which was a new thing at the time, because it was still just post World War II. We didn't understand radiation burns very much.
Right.
And then also the ground, when they tested the ground out there, the grass on the top was fine in some areas, but the roots were scorched underneath.
Weird.
Yeah, and it's, again, high radiation. Mm-hmm. So What did he see? Was it a government project? Was it an alien? We don't know.
Did his cavities feel okay?
Yeah, that's the question. He woke up, he had missing time. So these are all the things that now we associate common with an abduction or something, because he didn't remember that hour. He thought he was only out for like a few seconds.
Did he develop any new skills or anything like
that? Nothing unusual like that, but he did have radiation poisoning and died of cancer a short while later.
Sad.
So, went to his deathbed swearing it was real. The Boy Scouts admitted seeing the weird lights, and that's when they ran to get the farmer. It's one of those cases, what happened? And we'll never really know. So that's the Everglades abduction story.
Do you have any really scary stories in Florida?
Oh man, a lot of people ask me, what is the scariest place? Who's the scariest thing? Is Robert the scariest doll in the world? Yes, Robert is, but we love him. We always have to be polite to Robert. You got to follow the rules with Robert.
We were very polite to Robert, and when we came home, my husband's cat died.
Oh, see, did you take a picture without permission?
No, we didn't take a picture at all.
Did you say goodbye to Robert?
I don't remember.
If you didn't say goodbye to Robert, you didn't break the connection.
I don't know, but we came home and my husband's cat had like these crazy seizures. We're talking, he was flipping around in the craziest looking way I've ever seen, and he wasn't prone to seizures. Yeah, and he died. So we're blaming it on Robert.
So send him a letter. Send him a letter saying, Robert, we're sorry. That's how you break the curse, is just send him a letter. And you can spend days reading those letters. It's amazing. Some of my favorite letters in the world.
We read a bunch of the letters. We're like, wow, this is a trip. And then that happened. We're like, oh, shoot.
Yeah. Don't poke the bear.
And the cat was not old. I mean, he should not have died.
I'm sorry for your loss. No. But, and I don't blame Robert. It's the energy that's attached to him. But as scary as Robert the doll is, there's two places in Florida that are, I think the real history sometimes outweighs the legend. And one of the first ones we researched was here in St. Petersburg, called Many Lights. And it was one of those, I put it in the haunt because I had heard the story is if you say Many Lights 3 times, these green lights will chase you. Or will
only in that area, right?
It's just in St. Petersburg. And so we had this one effect. I worked hard on this effect of these 3 little LED lights that would fly around behind our swamp house. And it was just one of these little things. Most people, oh, look, lightning bugs. I'm like, no, it's Many Lights. It's okay. The story's on the website. But then as we started doing Eerie, Florida, I'm like, oh, I'm going to look at Many Lights. I want to find out what the heck Many Lights is. And I found out real quickly where I had heard it was completely different. On the north side of town was these green little lights that would chase you. On the south side of town, every time I'd ask somebody, don't go messing with Many Lights. Many Lights will get you. I was like, ooh. So it's serious down here. This is a deadly serious thing. And it was, and it's the cultural differences here. And so I get a little deeper, and finally somebody told me, oh, it's not Many Lights, it's Many Lightning. And she's the voodoo queen of St. Petersburg. And she's the reason we have so many thunderstorms, why our team is the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's a dozen reasons why we're the lightning capital of the world, according to folklore. Tampa itself is a native word for sticks of fire.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there you go. There's your folklore of the day that, it hasn't really been confirmed, but we're pretty sure. The Tocabega Indians, that was their word. But anyway,
there's a thunderstorm going on right now. I don't know if the microphone's picking up on it.
I haven't heard it, but
I thought it would go with your stories. Yeah.
But anyway, so Many Lightning, the voodoo queen, she has her gator boys, these little gator men that will come and steal your children.
What?
Little tiny alligator people that live in the sewers and will come out and steal your children if you leave them out at night. And so don't, beware of Many Lights, or gator boys will get you. So I was like, oh, okay. So then I'm like, oh man, I should have had little alligator people in my haunt. That would have been great.
Yeah.
They probably would have been more scared of that than those 3 little lights. But I'm like, where does this story come from? This is crazy. So I start digging and researching. And of course, I immediately think, all right, Many Lights, what does that sound like? And immediately I go, Mennonite. And so I start looking up Mennonites, and anything that could be considered something unusual. And I found it in Gibsonton, across Tampa Bay, which was a circus town where a lot of circus freaks, wintered, because Ringling was centered down here in Sarasota.
Yeah.
And a lot of other circuses were following in his wake so that they could get his leftovers. They couldn't get his A list, but they could get his B list or his C list,
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a whole circus culture, and Gibsonton was the home of the freaks. It was the freak show town, and it's even featured in American Horror Story and featured in a couple reality shows because the descendants are all still living there. Grady Stiles, the great lobster boy. We love you, Grady. And he's still doing his thing, and reach out to him if you ever want a picture. There was a Mennonite that ran a boarding house there that sequestered circus folk, and it got burned down. So we thought maybe somebody got angry, and maybe there was somebody with alligator skin, but I couldn't find any real ties to it. I was like, all right, we kind of went with it, but it was just nothing we really could do. And then while we were researching another story, the answer literally fell in my lap. I was at a St. Pete History Museum, and I was looking up another story, and I opened a book, and a thing fell out from between the pages right into my lap. And it was a fan, one of those hand fans that you would use to cool yourself off at a tourist attraction in the 1930s. And that tourist attraction was an alligator farm here in St. Petersburg. Well, one side was the alligator farm, but on the back side was a picture with two African-American children being chased by alligators. And it said gator bait. And this was apparently one of their star attractions, was that they would throw children into the alligator pit to be chased by alligators.
That's terrible.
So beware of mini lights was actually beware of the men with lights. The gator boys will steal your children.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yes, they were kidnapping children on the south side of town to entertain tourists.
Oh, it's awful.
And you think, oh, that's a long time ago, 1930s. So not as long ago as we'd like to think. Yeah.
That's awful.
Terrible. That thankfully that alligator farm is no more and destroyed. And but that's the real story. And so sometimes the scariest is the real history, right?
Awful.
So, the scariest place in Florida is even worse.
I don't know if I want to hear it.
All right, I'll say I can stop here. So
go ahead. Let's see what you got.
Right. There's one word that I can say, and those in the know will just shut down and be like, nope, we're done. So I'm gonna say it now, and you may lose some listeners here. And that word is Dozier, and that is the Dozier School for Boys. It was up in Marianna, Florida, and it opened in 1901. And it was supposed to be for the juvenile offenders, the worst of the worst. The 100 students were going to be sent there. Kids who killed other kids, kids who did terrible things to other kids. It's just a bad place. Within 5 years, they had 500 students, but hadn't expanded. So 500 crammed into the facilities for 100. And these are bad kids who murder other kids who rape other kids. It's terrible. And of course, they start this abuse allegations start immediately between student to student, basically inmate to inmate. They're not, the staff is not doing anything about it. So within 10 years, people are like, we've got to do something. So what do? We throw money at the problem, we expand it. And then more and more kids start getting sent there. And more kids start getting sent there. And it becomes a money pit, for the state. They just keep throwing money at it, just get rid of it. Now, the abuse allegations don't take long to spread from children to the staff. The staff are abusing the kids. In the 1960s, they build a blockhouse there called the White House. And it's just this one block, and it's supposed to be for solitary confinement. And they put these big industrial fans on it. This is a tiny building, 10 by 12. And why are you putting industrial fans on that when the rest of the schools doesn't even have air conditioning, or fans at all? It's weird. And then there's a fire. Several students die. Several teachers die. But again, it's not shut down. Nothing's done. A governor goes to investigate it. Oh, this place should be shut down. Doesn't do anything about it. All these things happen. It goes on till 2011 before it finally is shut down for budget reasons. And then the investigations finally start. 2008, there was an investigation, and they figured out what the White House was for. And the White House was actually where they went and took kids to beat the heck out of them. And they would, punish them. And you would only know how many times you'd been beat if the kid in the cell next to you kept count for you. And there were all these terrible things. And there was a boot hill there for all the kids who died there. And there were 24 reported deaths at Boot Hill, but there were 31 markers. So who were the extra 7, right? After it's closed, 2011, Professor Kimberly, that same archaeologist who found Hellview, found our shell midden, she went up there and said, Mark, I'm getting into Dozier. Do you want to come? I know you've been wanting to go there because you hear it's haunted. And I'm like, yes, please. So, but I'm just going because I really want to see the Boot Hill. We want to know who these 7 graves are because there are no records at Dozier are spotty at best, right? They would say things like "no longer here, presumed escape." That would just be some of the notes on these kids. We could go all over the world to visit places, to get grave information and stuff. You can go to some medieval church in England and go, I'm looking for this lady's grave. Okay, that's row 6, grave 7. She's been here since 1425. All right, great. Dozier, no records like that. These are just unmarked graves. So she gets the ground penetrating radar out and starts working on the grave sites. She found 55 bodies.
Oh.
So now we got a whole nother mystery on our hands, right? So what the heck is going on? It's still under investigation. It's been 10 years. They still haven't figured everything out.
Is that facility still open?
No, it was shut down, like I said, 2011.
Okay, and all right. I'm sorry I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, and they are actually bulldozing it, trying to hide it. Where they bulldozed the Boot Hill and put up the new sheriff's office up there. Now we find, and most of the kids who were sent here, it's supposed to be the worst, right? So that's what everybody says. Well, you can't take the word of these kids. They're all, offenders. Right. Well, some of the kids were sent there for truancy, excessive smoking. My favorite was one from 1952 was sent there for incorrigibleness. What does that mean?
I would be sent there for that.
Exactly. And then you're being put in with a child murderer. Great. It's a terrible place. We went there for ghosts. Of course, there are ghostly sightings, and there's you can hear the kids singing in the old church. It was their only place of solace. So you hear the children's voices echoing, all that, but it doesn't matter because the real story is how tragic that place is. And there's an organization called the White House Boys, and they are survivors, and they are still seeking legal means to get more of the story out and find out more of the cover-ups. If you go to their website, it's also a place of therapy. So they write their stories of the things they survived. If you really want to cry yourself to sleep some night, that's good reading. It's terrible. And when you go there, it's crazy. It's about to be bulldozed. There are some areas of it that are already bulldozed. They are saving the White House. They sealed it in 2008. The state Senate did. And it was the first time they admitted that there were problems. And they said, who watches the watchman, basically. And let no one ever experience this again. So they sealed it, and it's supposed to not be bulldozed, but I'm still convinced. Oh, accidentally we bulldozed it like they did Boot Hill. One of the buildings is being repurposed as an adult learning center for adults with autism to help them get into the workplace. So I think that's a good cause. That's great. They're just trying to wipe it away. It's
sure.
Crazy.
Is this in one of your books?
That's in Erie. That's
in Erie, Florida.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And now normally we go. When we do our books, we do the Panhandle, across, and then zigzag down to the Keys, because the Keys are always, the most exciting thing at the end. Because you got Robert the Doll, you got, the guy who married a corpse, you got all these other fun things. This one was a story we put towards the end of Erie, because if we started with that story, no one would want to read the rest of the book.
Yeah.
And there's still, there was a family in Tennessee. We found a descendant, a grandnephew of one of the boys. And he had been buried in Tennessee. The school had sent the coffin and said he was hit by a train while escaping. Sealed casket. So they buried. Well, this grandnephew finally, now we have a family member. We can get the body exhumed. We can figure out what really happened. Because I don't think that's what happened. I think he was beat to death or something, or worse. And so Professor Kimberly goes up, digs up the body. We get into the coffin. It's filled with wood. There's no body.
What?
They buried a casket full of wood. Yeah. What was the cover up? What are they hiding?
Where is
his record? His record down at the school is escaped. But why would you send a body to the family then?
Right.
Yeah. Or why would you send the empty casket? It's there's so
much. And they
much.
didn't think anyone would open the casket and look?
Nobody did until we did.
And why didn't anyone look?
Because it was sealed and he had been hit by a train. You don't want to see that.
Yeah.
So, it was the 1920s. Nobody thought about that. Crazy.
Like, who would lie? Who would lie about
and
it?
most of these kids were orphans, had no family. That's why they were sent there. It was just a way to get rid of them.
Right.
And they were child labor. They were actually growing their own gardens and maintaining the property and all that. So.
Well, hold on. If he was still alive, how old would he be today?
Oh, gosh. So he'd been over 100 by now.
Okay.
So,
all right. So he's not walking.
Yeah. They're not likely. Not likely.
Wow.
Because they was one of the early students. So, it's crazy.
Yeah, because you said there were some that were still?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because it was open until 2011. So there are still, lots of people that not that old that were there, and some that survived from the 50s and 60s and still talk about it. It's a scary, scary place. And that is, to me, hallowed ground of the worst, the worst kind of hallowed, though.
Yeah.
One of those, we shouldn't disturb it. We shouldn't be doing all these things, but we are. There's a dog kennel there now.
Have you ever seen a ghost, Mark?
I've had some unusual encounters for years. I don't like to use the term ghost. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well,
it's one of those things.
by the way, David Sidoti does not
Yeah.
like skunk ape.
No,
by the way, he thinks it's highly disrespectful.
I agree.
So just so you know.
Well, Florida, we can't have nice things in Florida. We rename everything. The skunk ape is Bigfoot. It's Sasquatch.
Yes.
Early days, he was the wild man. For our sea monster, we have this giant pink sea serpent that was seen from the St. Johns River for hundreds of years, and it sank a steamship, and it attacked boats and all this stuff, and it has a big gray shell on its back, and it's giant, 40 feet long, and as wide as a wheel as a barrel of flour and stuff like that. And what do we call it? The Beast of St. John's? No. The St. John's River monster? No. We call him Pinky. So we have a monster, a Sasquatch in the town of Barden that haunts the town. Is almost like a ghostly Sasquatch, because he's seen with a lantern, and his ghostly light is seen before he appears, and then after he's gone, he'll disappear.
I've never heard of a Sasquatch with a lantern.
Exactly. I love this guy because he's like the goofiest Sasquatch in all the stories. He's like,
I'm afraid of the dark.
At one point, they see him where he's sitting with his lantern, and he's got a fishing rod where he's actually fishing in a lake. So I'm like, this is my guy, man. I identify with this Sasquatch. I just want to
if he had a cooler. Right, if you had a cooler of beer or something.
And a lot of people describe him as panting all the time. And I'm like, yeah, he's got a fur coat on. He's living near Jacksonville. Yes, you're going to be panting all the time. We have 9 months of August. Come on.
He doesn't know where the cool weather is.
Yep, exactly. But anyway, is he the Beast of Barden? No. Is he the Barden Monster? No. It's the Barden Booger.
The Barden Booger?
Barden Booger.
I'll remember that.
And in the 1960s, he had a song, the Barden Booger Boogie. So there you go. You can Google that and find it on YouTube. So,
all right. So let's get back to ghosts that are not allowed to be called ghosts. So what sort of encounters have you had?
So, well, real quick, just to explain this, I am not a paranormal investigator. I am not a Bigfoot hunter. I am not a UFO investigator. I go with Bigfoot hunting teams. I go with paranormal teams. I go with UFO teams to get their stories and to find out what they're doing, and to get, and to corroborate their evidence, corroborate their story. That's really what I'm there for, in addition to history and folklore and all that. So when I go with paranormal teams, I like to bring up the history. Like, we were in a haunted location in Brooksville called the May Stringer House, which has several known ghosts. And they kept getting on one of their, speaking devices, which I don't like the science behind this stuff a lot. And it kept saying this one word that in the war memorabilia room, and it was a word that they didn't understand because it didn't fit any of the ghosts. It didn't fit any of the, the names of any of the artifacts. So, as a historian, they're like, oh, this is garbage. And I'm like, no, that word is Fort Walton, which was where 90% of the Florida soldiers trained for World War II. The word was Walt, and no one had put that together. It's like, so somebody was talking about their time at Walton. So anyway, I like to think that this stuff, I like to call it preternatural, which is something Shirley Jackson came up with for Haunting of Hill House back in the day. It's stuff we don't understand yet. It's stuff we might someday. It's like chiropractic medicine, right? A lot of doctors still say it doesn't exist. It's not real, but it gives people relief when you do it sometimes. So is it real? The more we study it, we're learning, it kind of is kind of real. But so is massage therapy. But we learn other things like, magnetism. We didn't understand that for a long time. We refused to admit it existed, but then we figured it out. And that's what this stuff is. I think this is stuff we don't understand yet. Why do Bigfoot's footprints just stop? Is he a ghost of a caveman? Is there some sort of quantum thing? Is he a parallel dimension jumper? There's all these theories. We don't know. I mean, and this is all stuff we didn't understand. And we're just starting to understand quantum entanglement, dark matter in space. And these are things you told somebody that 20 years ago, they'd have laughed at you and said, what the hell are you talking about?
Did you see the article about they were playing the sound of the black hole?
Black hole, right? The thing that came out of a black hole. I was told my whole life, nothing comes out of a black hole. but we saw something come out of it with the new telescope. Thank goodness. So we learn new things all the time. Even Tesla and Thomas Edison were working on devices to talk to the dead that never came out, but they were working on it because they knew it was a science that could be there. And I think that someday we will understand this stuff. So that's why I'm like, is it a ghost? I don't know what to call it. It's something I didn't understand. And something I still don't understand. One of my earliest memories as a child was living in a house in Ohio and going up into the attic area, which was my play area, and seeing a dark shape, a dark figure with red eyes. And it came for me. And the next thing I remember is waking up, my mom carrying me down the stairs. You're going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. What happened? I don't know. It's a weird memory. Was it a nightmare? It's my earliest memory. Now, other weird things have happened over the years, but the one time I think I saw what we would call a ghost. We were at the Bellevue Biltmore in Clearwater, Florida. It was one of the old Biltmore hotels, and it was about to be demolished. This is before I started doing the books. I was doing Hellview though, and I'm like, hey, they're tearing down this old hotel from the 1800s that hasn't been renovated since the 70s, and so I'm going to get at least some kitschy lamps or stuff because they were auctioning everything. And I'm like, all right, we get there, and it's a Gatsby party. So everybody's dressed up in all kinds of 1920s and 30s outfits, and here I am in my Hellview t-shirt and jeans. So I kind of stood out like a sore thumb. But I bumped into a paranormal team that was there called the Spirits of St. Petersburg. And they were going to do an investigation on the third floor because there's a bellhop ghost up there. And they wanted to see if they could get one last one last recording of the room and stuff like that for posterity.
You almost said one last interview. Can we get a last interview?
Well, that was me. I was interviewing them. So I was like, all right, I want to.
We got to interview this ghost.
I want to talk to this ghost. Yeah, exactly.
Where does a ghost go when you take away their haunted location?
I got a story for that one too.
Okay, all right.
Anyway, while we're there, there's bellhops in costumes, running around. So because it's the last day of the hotel, and I was like, oh, that's great. Let's go up to the third floor. The auction's too expensive. Let's go up to the third floor. So the paranormal team and I go up to the third floor, and we get off the elevator down the hall. At the end of the hall, at the room, is a bellhop, and he comes down the hall towards us, and we're like, oh, bravo, cosplay, win. And he nods, goes past us, and then the girl on the end goes, what are you guys applauding? What are you talking about? She didn't see him. 3 of us saw him. This is a paranormal team. They had cameras. They had recording devices, all this stuff. They were going to turn it on when we got down to the end of the hall to look for it. Now, I immediately am like, mind blown, but I'm like, let's go downstairs. I want to see who punked us because this guy is just gone. Did he go down this? So I go down the stairs, which are right there. He must have just jumped into the stairway. And I'm like, man, he's not here. So I run down the stairs. I'm looking at all the bellhops. Who did it? Who got us? Nobody knows what we were talking about. And I met all the bellhops. None of them were the guy.
Wow.
So did I see a ghost? I saw something that I can't explain. One person didn't. So not everybody can see them. So that's why people are like, oh, I've never seen a ghost. And I'll be like, I don't know if you can say that because that guy looked legit to me, looked real, looked like a guy in a costume, not ghostly, not glowing, not pale, not see-through. He just looked like a guy walking down the hall towards me. Managed to save the hotel. Parts of it were torn down that were unfixable, but that main building is still there.
Oh, so the bellman still has a place to be.
He has a place to be. So in Clearwater, there was an attraction that was built in 1970s. It was called Boardwalk. It was built like an old turn of the century fishing village, and it had a couple restaurants and it had a theater, and it was just this real. It looked like it'd been there for 100 years, but it'd only been there since the 70s. And people would go out there, and it was just a tourist attraction right on the inner of Tampa Bay. There was a theater there that had a ghost. Had a young lady in a Victorian outfit complete with a parasol that would walk out onto the stage in performances. This would be like Guys and Dolls or South Pacific. Why is there a Victorian lady with a parasol walking onto the stage? And at one point, she literally disappeared in front of an entire audience. Hundreds of witnesses to this. All right. Wow. Research on the theater. There was never any production involving a Victorian lady. This thing was built on swampland. where the hell did she come from? So obviously she was attached to something that was in the theater or something around the theater. So an attached ghost is what, some of these people refer to them, something, or I like to think, got quantum entangled. And that's why she was a repeat just walking across the stage. What's weird is,
tell everyone what quantum entangled
okay,
is.
this is a thing where we started realizing this is something, was we actually fired up the Hadron Collider, we figured this out. It was a theory that atoms are connected and can be connected across great distances, but are still connected. So that can also affect time. So things can be in one time and another. This kind of ties into what's also called stone tape theory, where someone has a severe incident in their lives, usually something like being murdered, and their energy, because all of our energy goes away. Matter and energy can't, energy can't be destroyed, just moved. It gets locked in the walls. And that's why you see ghosts that are just repeating the same actions over and over again. So that's where we get that quantum entanglement theory. That's why sometimes ghosts are attached to a doll or attached to a thing. And, so that's why the image of Robert can be Robert, it's, again, this is pseudoscience. None of it. I think at some point, somebody's going to put some money into this and figure this stuff out. I just don't know when that's going to be, because right now you talk about that and everybody thinks you're the aliens guy going aliens. Yeah, poor Giorgio.
Whatever. I mean,
he's a good scientist.
The U.S. government came out like, UFOs are, we've seen a bunch of them. Lots and
we
lots
don't
of
know
records.
what they are. Yeah, we don't know what they are.
Just thought we'd tell you in the middle of COVID because you're
so nobody
worried about other stuff.
Highest inflation ever. Nobody's going to care about UFOs. Now's our time. Now's
Gas
our
prices
window.
are up. Tell everyone.
Now's our window.
Right.
No aliens.
We told
Don't say aliens yet. We're not allowed to talk about Roswell. Not allowed to talk about other things. But anyway, so the theater gets in a big fire. Eventually, the boardwalk is closed, and they finally bulldoze it. And then the Coast Guard buys the land and lets nature reclaim it. They use it for training and security purposes. The 9/11 happens. We gotta seal that area off. And so we thought that would be the end of our ghost, right? The ghost is gone. But kayakers out there see this lady in white walking through the mangroves with her parasol.
What? So she's just hanging out in that spot.
Still, there was nothing there before. It's not there anymore. If she was attached to something, it's gone.
Right.
Why is she still there?
Yeah.
So what is this? It's a weird phenomena. And she's the lady in white of Boatyard Village. And she's still there.
Wow.
And the boardwalk is gone, but she's still seen. It's crazy.
She's still in that one spot.
And in daylight. This isn't like a ghost at night. She's seen walking through the day. There's a fun story for you. So
what about Appalachia?
Okay. So let me do one quick Florida that ties to Appalachia. I kind of hinted at it earlier.
Okay.
And it's another UFO story. So
I feel like a little kid. I'm like, tell me another story. Tell me another story. Okay.
That's what I do. I do. So I go down to the Miami area. Just north of Miami is a little area called Crestview. And there was a school there, 1952. Same year of the big flap of UFOs. And little boys outside and at playground, and little Jimmy looks up and he sees something he can't identify. It looks like one of those flying saucers he's heard about. And a teacher comes out and says, Jimmy, recess is over. Come in. He's like, but what's that? So the teacher sees it too. So they both see it. Classic saucer shape with a turret on top. It flies away, super speed. And so they go inside. What was that? The next day, everybody at school, what did Jimmy see? What did Jimmy see? And so they're all talking about it. It comes back and it brings friends, and it comes right down to the school. And now hundreds of kids see it. Teachers see it. There's no keeping everybody in the classroom. They all run out to see this thing, and it's right across the street from them behind a fence. And they can't get to it because it's behind this fence. And it's this big turret saucer, but then these little ships are all around it, and they're dancing with it, and they look like little cylinder shapes, and they're spinning so fast that they sometimes look like balls. And so now we would call those the Tic Tacs that we've been seeing on all these recent Navy sightings. But because they didn't fit anything, nobody really knew how to describe them back then. Cylindrical, and then it flew into the trees, but instead of smashing the trees, it kind of portaled out. It just like disappeared into the trees. But then the big ship comes back, does a big spin, and then flies way up into the sky, fast and gone. Okay, what happened? Kids are, this is insane. They all go back into classrooms. Everybody's talking about it. The military show up, and start investigating and start interrogating all the kids and interrogating the teachers. And one of the teachers says, well, it was kind of hovering like a helicopter. So guess what the newspapers say the next day?
There's a helicopter sighting.
Helicopters, terrify students. It's debunked, right? It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talks about it for 50 years. Then the advent of social media. And then UFO videos start popping up, and UFOs become popular on television. Ancient aliens become popular on television. And then the Navy comes out with the Tic Tac videos and all that. They're declassifying.
Mm-hmm.
All the witnesses that are still alive from that, guess who they reach out to? The creepy Florida guy, the guy who writes the books about eerie Florida. So I get a dozen people saying, I know what I saw. It was not helicopters and all this. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to write a new book. So Crestview Incident, we'll go into it. And so I start interviewing them. And one of them says, come down here. I've got something to show you. So I go down to his house on my next trip to Miami. And he's like, this is my dad's diary when they came to, and here's the day when they came to my house to question me. And he wrote down the names. And I was all excited because now I could do Freedom of Information Act and maybe see if I can find out if any of these soldiers had deathbed confessions, or, maybe reach out to their families and see if they knew anything about it. And, I got a whole nother track, right? So first one was like a Captain Sinclair of the Coast Guard. So that was an interesting name. I've got his family tree, but sadly he's gone, and, and the family hasn't replied. But the next one was a Captain Smith of the Air Force. That's not helpful. So there were several Captain Smiths of the Air Force in Miami in 1952. So not really helpful. But the third name said government man. And then the last name, Cold. Now, if you're into UFOs at all, that name should have just sent chills up your spine, because 1952, 6 months earlier than the Crestview sighting, was an incident in West Virginia where a man named Woody Derenberger was driving along an interstate heading towards Parkersburg, and a strange cylindrical craft literally pulls him over, and a strange man gets out of the craft, a flying craft, and he's in a shining suit, and he's smiling, and he tells him, my name is Indrid Cold, and I come in peace, and I want to know more about your world. I am a traveler. Tell me more. And he says all this without ever speaking a word. He does it all telepathically, according to Woody Derenberger. And the whole time he's just smiling at him. So he becomes known as the smiling man in UFO circles. And some describe it as kind of like the first Men in Black encounter. The way he's described is this suit and all this, like trying to blend in with humans and stuff like that, and talking in his head, but talking weird. And now 6 months later, I have a record of that man's name in Miami, working for the government, investigating a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly, wow. So if I have to write about Indrid Cold, I have to write about Mothman, because John Keel, who wrote the Mothman book, tied Indrid Cold because he loved that Indrid Cold story so much. He tied it into Mothman. They really don't have much to do with each other, but there's the cool stories not too far apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, well, I'm going to have to write about this. I'll have to write about that. And I'll have to write about this. So when we get up there, that's going to be the book. But while I'm doing that, I remember my monster in the holler of my family's land in Kentucky. And it's this stupid story. And I realize, oh my gosh, all these stories are holler monsters. They're little monster stories that have grown. Like the Jersey Devil is a holler monster story that made it big. The Snallygaster is another holler monster that just happened to hit national papers and stuff like that. So I realized there are all these little monsters that didn't hit big, but are still cool stories and cool folklore that might be a mini lightning, that might be something like that, that have a real history behind them. And so I researched my family monster, and my family monster sounds like something out of South Park, right? It's called the bench leg. Does that not sound like something out of South Park?
It does.
He's got a wooden leg.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the body of a cow or a cat, like a panther or something. And it's got a misshapen human head that glows. What? And I was told that he would chase you, and he chases the cattle. And then if you were a bad man, he'd be up in a tree, jumping from tree to tree, and he would hit you with his club, his whoop ass stick of a leg, and he would knock you off your horse. So, if you were bad. So what is this story? And I wanted to tell ghost stories. I wanted to hear monster stories. Why would I tell this story? So I had written it off for years, but then as I'm researching this stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I've got a story like that right on my home land. When I was a kid, I had a strange incident where I saw something that I didn't understand, something glowing running through the woods, and I thought, is that the bench leg? That was in my kid's brain. I never looked further. I admit I ran, because it was something weird and glowing in my woods, and I didn't want to know what it was at the time. Now I wish I could travel back in time and and check it out. So this is that was my monster story, and so I'm like, now I'm reaching out to families, saying, hey, I write weird books about Florida, but I'm from Appalachia. Would you mind reaching, telling me your story? And I got a lot of hits. A lot of people came back with their stories. And then
That's
I was able to
great.
research them. And for the bench leg, I found there was a peddler who was killed in the 1700s near my family farm. And he had defended himself with a wooden stick. And when they murdered him, to hide the crime, they buried a cow and they butchered a cow on top of the gravesite to hide the crime.
Huh.
Spirit of vengeance born from that, of course. That would make the story. Don't
Yeah.
go into the woods without a stick, or the bench leg will get you. That's the warning. Some of these stories in Appalachia that I'm able to put in Erie, Appalachia, I know have never been printed anywhere before, but some.
Well, that's exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so happy. One was the one I will give you for free.
Aw.
There was a family.
Now, am I allowed to share this with everyone, or is
Of
it
course,
really?
this is
Oh,
no, this
okay.
is podcast. We're
All right.
allowed. I'm sharing it with the world. There was a town that had a mine, an iron mine near Huntington, and this iron mine was digging, and they had kind of run dry, so they were blasting a wall to go a little further in. And when they blasted the wall looking for a new vein, they opened up a cavern. Now, Mammoth Cave system goes all through the Appalachians, so finding caverns is not unusual. But in this cavern was the corpse of a bear, a freshly killed bear, and two creatures were feasting on it. In the description, they were eating the bear, and they didn't even seem stirred by this huge explosion that had knocked down the wall. And he described them as glass-eyed and stared at them with long, crazy hair and curved fingers. And they looked up, and all the men ran from the mine. Like, we don't want anything to do with this. This comes from a letter that a man sent his brother in Huntington saying, what do I do? Now this letter, the first half of the letter is, hey, how's Aunt Sally? I hope the wedding's okay. All this. And then this weird thing happened in my mind. What should I do? So I don't know what the letter went back said. They told me that grandma talked about that she told him to make sure you don't go back in the mine until those things are gone. So we're able to find a newspaper article, a want ad, if you will, for hunters wanted to kill bears in a mine that matches that mine and the date of that letter 2 days later. So then we got the next letter from him, which is basically a week later. And it says, hey, they hired some men, they killed the bears, and I saw that some of those things were carried out with them. The men said nothing as they left. So we started working again the next day, and hope to see y'all soon, and please send cobbler, and stuff like that. It was really just a cute letter. And I love that these paragraphs are just in the middle of these normal ass letters, right? And the family had kept them for all these years because they were so unique. And now what's weird is that mine, just about 5 years later, has a tragedy where they're trying to blow up another wall, and they set some dynamite, blow, and nothing happened. So when they go to check the explosives, figure out why the fuse isn't working, it goes off and kills about 20 men that we know of. Again, newspapers at the time didn't report day laborers, didn't report minorities if they died. We just know 20 men died.
Mhm.
We think more. So that mine has been marked with tragedy for a long time. It is still open, that mine. That is the Rose Run mine. But now they do coal.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Very intriguing. And now we're moving into the heavy pet peeve segment. Everyone has those little things that annoy them, but we rarely talk about it when we're trying to get to know someone. So what are your pet peeves?
My pet peeves. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I thought about this quite a bit because I do have a few. But the one that gets me the most, I think the one that just bugs me the most is, as a parent, I have every right to say this, bringing your child under 3 to a movie theater on opening night of any movie. I don't care if it's a kid's movie. There's going to be scary things. There's going to be things, and they're going to scream, they're going to cry, and they're going to want to leave. That's part of being a parent. Either get a babysitter or don't go to the movie, or go to those morning matinees that they
Where
do
it's
for the day after
parents and the
for the
kids.
parents. The lights are on. It's
Yep.
not quite the same experience, but that's what it's a sacrifice to be a good parent. You got to do that. So
Yep.
that is my biggest pet peeve.
That's
I'm like,
being a
those
good
people-
parent and a good citizen.
Listen, yep. There's a special place in hell for you people who don't do that. So.
There's a comedian going, there's a baby being a baby.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, going to the water and being upset that an alligator attacks you in Florida. There's if it's standing water, there's an alligator in it. It's going to happen.
Yep.
So yeah, if you bring a baby to a movie, it's going to cry. Be ready for that.
Yep. And now we're moving into the fear segment. What were you afraid of as a child, and what are you afraid of now? For someone who loves creepy and scary things, I'm not sure how you're going to be able to answer this.
As a child, I was terrified of spiders.
Oh, okay.
I hated spiders. Hated
And
them. I love monsters and ghosts, so I was never afraid of the dark.
Okay.
It was just one of those things. Why would I be? And that's why I love space and I love the stars and all that, because oh my gosh, and then it was the 70s and Star Wars came out and my world was changed.
Mhm.
And now it's sci-fi monsters. Of course I'm going to love sci-fi monsters and all that.
Yeah.
As I got older, my wife actually started raising jumping spiders as a hobby, because I'm allergic to all the fuzzy things. So
Mhm.
my pets are lizards and snakes and spiders. So I'm good with spiders now. They don't bother me as much. I'm still not 100%,
Okay.
but they don't terrify me anymore.
I have a question about spiders coming up in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
Now what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of something happening to my kids.
Oh,
they're all grown
you're a
up.
good dad.
They're 28 and 23, and I'm still just terrified bad things happen to them. So
Yeah, you're a good dad. And now it's time for the very interesting game show. Here are the rules. No politics, no religion, no ad nauseum topic du jour in your answers. And let's see if you can come up with the most interesting answer. What do zombies do for fun when they're not hunting for brains?
what most people don't realize is most zombies are lactose intolerant. So they go cow tipping.
They go cow tipping. Okay. The ceilings of some front porches are painted haint blue to prevent evil spirits from entering the home. What color would you paint on your front door, and what would you want it to keep out?
Well, haint blue is fun, but one of the other fun reasons why you paint it blue is so that wasps won't nest on it because they think it's the sky.
I didn't know that.
So that's the real reason behind it. I know the legend is more fun, but that's the real reason.
I didn't know that. Look at you teaching me something.
There you go.
Love it. Yeah.
But the color of my front door is always going to be blue because I'm a big Doctor Who nerd, and so I want it to be bigger on the inside. But it's also when you go out, it's bigger on the outside. So that's why I have a TARDIS blue door.
I love that. Okay. An Irish woman married and divorced a pirate ghost who was a few hundred years older than she. Why didn't the marriage work?
Well, the obvious answer is he ghosted her.
Yes.
But that's that's the fun answer. Yeah, but no, the real reason is that he had better booty in mind.
Love it. Love it. I love the puns for this one. A lot of people get stumped, but the other people that are into it, I mean, they're throwing them out there like that. Here's the spider one. Some jumping spiders can see into light spectrums that humans cannot. What do they see that we do not?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I'd say, what do they see that we do not? They see, I would say scientifically, they could probably see the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's why they can see spiders and ghosts.
I want a ridiculous answer.
But we want the ridiculous answer.
Yeah.
So the ridiculous answer would be, they would be able to see the lost second season of Joss Whedon's Firefly.
Okay. All right. I love that. Got to say, this is the very first time I've asked that question and someone says to me, "Oh, we raise jumping spiders." Like that has never, ever happened.
The coolest thing about them is one of the reasons why I'm not afraid of them anymore is they, to talk to each other, to get each other's attention, they do these little dances and they wave their
Uh-huh.
arms. And I like to think that they look like little wizards casting spells at each other. Yeah. So yeah, so that's that. I think they're the most adorable thing in the world. If you ever just watch jumping spider videos, you'll just be like, oh, they've got eyebrows. They can manipulate them and make you feel sorry for them, and they're cute. So it just happens.
I'm going to have to check this out. Okay. I have two more questions and we're done for the evening. The hair on honeybees' eyeballs helps them detect humidity, determine how the wind is blowing, and pick up extra pollen. Pick a weird place to grow hair on your body and give it a fascinating function besides just being hair.
Oh man, well that's the problem. I can't grow any hair anywhere on my body except for this small goatee of a beard. So if I could grow hair anywhere, it would probably be on the back of my earlobe, and I would use that special ability of that to determine where the nearest Popeye's fried chicken is.
I love it. I wrote a question for you.
Oh,
Yeah, I thought, I got this guy on here who loves everything spooky and what have you. And I thought you probably love Halloween, which of course you do. So, what would be the most ridiculous costume to have a sexy version of? So, like a sexy aardvark or a sexy architect? Like what would be just absolutely stupid, ridiculous as sexy?
wow.
Yeah,
A sexy manatee.
a sexy manatee.
That would be because that's the legend that the pirates thought manatees were mermaids. So
That's
that's
right.
why.
They did.
So
Yeah.
I would totally have a mermaid, but it would be a manatee bride,
It'd be a sexy manatee.
and then you could team up with a pirate, that would be, this is my wife, and it would just be, so great. I love it.
I do. I like that a lot. Okay. And for the last question of the day, which is asked on every single episode, what should have been invented by now?
Oh my gosh. A machine that can talk to ghosts.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. There you
So
go.
should have
So
been
right
that
on
test.
brand.
Tesla was working on it. Edison was working on it. Why not? Why is it not here? Those guys were working on it hundreds of years ago. Come on.
Yeah. I bet it exists.
I'm sure it does. It's
Yeah.
right there with the Roswell stuff. It's just we're not allowed to have it yet. So
That's right. Well, thanks, Mark. How can folks get in touch with you?
you can find me on all the socials, usually at Eerie, Florida. But now that we're doing stuff out of the state, you can find us at Eerie Travels. That's also the local TV show I do down here where I tell stories and stuff. It's on YouTube now. Eerie Travels TV. Look us up. You can find. I'm not hard to find. Just Google Weird Florida, Creepy Florida, Eerie Florida. Weird Florida was the late great Charlie Carlson was my mentor, and he did that back in the '80s. And we were working on the new one when he passed away, and that's what became a little bit of Eerie Florida. So we all owe it to him. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, the master of weird himself. But anyway, yeah, you can find me all there. And then if you order books from eerieflorida.com, my lovely wife will draw a little something in there, and I'll scribble some notes in there too. But you can find us at every Walgreens, Cracker Barrel, and CVS in the state. And then now hopefully along the Appalachian Trail, because the new one just came out in June.
Yeah, well, congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah, very excited. We're doing all the fun stuff. We're doing Dragon Con. We're doing Mothman Festival later this year. I'm doing Cryptid Con in Kentucky in November. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. You'll find me, if you go to the website, you'll see where we're going to be.
Yeah, and you said you were on TV too, right?
I'm on a lot of shows. Yeah, I'm the talking head guy, so I'm on some documentaries and a lot of other stuff. But I have a local TV show down here in Port Richey called Eerie Travels. It's on Area 52 Media, which is a local cable channel. But you can find it on YouTube. They've uploaded the first 10 episodes, but second season will start real soon after Mothman Festival and all that, so we can actually start filming.
Oh, you were busy. Mark, it has been a pleasure. I absolutely love this conversation and appreciate all of your time.
Oh, it was an honor, Deedre. Thank you so much for having me. So I had way too much fun.
All right. Well, until next time, folks, be interesting.